It's a good call out. I think being organized is one thing you do a little bit better than I do.
Yeah, honestly, we both have to do that really strongly, right? I mean, you have a whole bunch of organization around what's going on with the product development efforts, right? And that helps me keep organized because then I can see and plan for what we need to do in the marketing side.
That's a good point. Speaking of us working together, let's have a chat about, I guess, the ways we work together and how it's different for our individual roles.
Cool. Sounds good.
So let's talk engaging with customers. For me, when I chat with customers, I'm talking to them about maybe pain points with the product. Maybe there's something they are trying to do that they haven't figured out how to do. Maybe they just want to give some feedback, hopefully positive feedback, but it's okay if it's not positive feedback. That's part of my role, is making sure that I can improve their experience. So part of that also involves talking about the roadmap and what's coming, maybe tailoring the roadmap to fit some of their needs, but also kind of my general vision. A lot of the time customers will ask me things like, what's your vision for the product 3 years from now, 5 years from now? What do you see this doing? How about you, Cameron? How do you engage with customers?
So engaging with customers, first and foremost, it's understanding kind of, are they in alignment with what we're trying to pitch, right? The messaging that we use, the assets that we create, is it helping? Is it helping them understand what we're trying to provide to them? So oftentimes it's, jumping on and just more or less listening to a sales conversation, right? You listen to how the product's being pitched and what are the responses from your customer. Sometimes it's working, sometimes it's not, but either way, you have to be willing to learn. And that's absolutely critical when working with your customers. The second, and one of my favorite things to do is building references, right? It's hearing how customers are using the product. And when they're so happy that they're willing to speak on behalf of your product or service, that's terrific. And we use that in a variety of different ways. So that's, building a story or getting a quote from them, or even lining them up to speak to other customers on your behalf. So that's two of the ways that I speak with customers often.
I have to say that, as a product manager, getting a customer reference quote, I think it just makes my day, makes my month, maybe even makes my year, honestly, depending on how good the quote is. I think part of what's so important for me is the fact that Cameron takes the time to make sure that he asks the right questions and really gathers a lot of this customer's experience and summarizes it in a really great quote. So that's been really helpful for me, especially when it comes to, maybe some salespeople asking, do you have other customers that I can quote or reference when trying to make a sale for my product? Which brings me to the question of, how do you engage with sales? For me, it's more of helping them, like I said, maybe bringing them back reference points. Sometimes if there's, an issue that needs some attention from me, I'll come and help them or point them to the right resource, whether that's documentation or if it just means jumping on a call myself, or it just means answering questions of scenarios like, oh, well, my customer wants to do these 5 things. Will they be able to do this with your product or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And then from the marketing side, right, it's when we're working with sellers, it's either providing them different assets that maybe would be beneficial for a certain conversation that they're having, right? We might create a specific set of assets for a really big engagement. We'll help answer questions as they come up about features or the roadmap sometimes, if it's prepared and ready to go. Oftentimes, though, it's also brainstorming, right? They'll say, hey, here's the challenge I have trying to make this sale. What do we have? What can we make? Or what could we do to try and put ourselves in the best light here in a competitive situation? So it's very collaborative at this point, right? A lot of the work in creating things has been done, but now it's trying to really refine, what is that pitch and how can we support sales in getting it done?
That makes a lot of sense. So on a day-to-day, I think we probably interact with the same core set of people. For you, very likely it's sales. But for me, I don't really interact with the sales team nearly as much as you do. It's definitely focused on mostly the engineers I work with, just for stand-ups, for asking questions, and of course with the other product managers on my team, whether it's my direct report or people outside of my org, maybe asking questions about my product. So I think that that's probably mostly like if you were really to ask me who I talk to every day, it would just be engineering and product. What are your thoughts, Cameron? Is it just sales or is it other groups for you too?
Sales is absolutely one of the big ones. And I don't know if keyed in on this a little bit, right? But the sales team are really having the most true conversations with your customers that you could have, right? They're hearing about the needs. The customers are willing to kind of be very clear and like, hey, I can't solve this today. Can you guys do that? Right. So sales teams are getting that information unfiltered oftentimes. So being able to directly connect with them, get that information, and then find ways that we can improve our messaging or how we talk about the product is key. So we try and do that, as much as possible. The second is marketing, right? As a product marketing manager, a lot of what you do has to be amplified. It has to be collaborated with other teams. So you can't do everything in a bubble in any type of role. And the rest of your marketing organization is absolutely critical in your success and in kind of amplifying and succeeding in your go-to-market work.
That makes tons of sense. You mentioned, like gathering information and trying to make material available. What would you say is the kind of like assets you work on to help people understand the product?
Absolutely. So beyond just sales decks and whatnot, right? We also try and build enablement around those, right? For every slide that we produce that might go in front of a customer, we should also have kind of the notes, the speaker notes, essentially of, why are you sharing this information with the customer and how should you present it and when should you bring it up? So we really try and make it very clear and crisp as to, hey, this is why this is important to you and why it's going to be important to your prospect. General trainings, right? It's, this is how we talk about the product or service or the business as a whole, right? We want to be able to give them, the 50,000 foot view as well as the 100-foot view and kind of, various points in between depending on their need. And then the other assets are really just, everything related to, customer facing material.
Yep. And I mean, I've definitely sent people to you a good number of times whenever they're asking me for things like, oh, do you have, a deck for this? Or is there something I can put in front of a customer for this? I'm not good at making the pretty PowerPoints. I think that's definitely something you do much better than I do. But I rely on those kinds of things pretty heavily, especially when it comes to helping our sellers find the right ways to talk to customers about the product. So it really helps.
Yeah.
From my side, really all I work on is just documentation, at least when it comes to product assets. And granted, those documents are also customer facing. So we write them so that other people can understand how to use our products. But we also use that for internal enablement, kind of the same way Cameron mentioned that he builds trainings. And some of the docs can end up being the basis for enablement. So that is, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mentioned a lot of the training, the customer facing materials, right, that I create, but that's not just me, right? That's you and I collaborating and making sure all the messaging that we mentioned earlier, all those personas are lined up, right? This is just kind of the culmination of all that work. But there's a lot of collaboration between us that gets us to that point where we're ready to make it.
I think one of my favorite parts of this kind of material is making like use case examples where we come together and we talk about, okay, so this is the scenario. How do people use the product here and what benefits does it drive? Because you really covered that like messaging perspective and I can come in with my product knowledge. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of the partnership.
Absolutely.
So last item I had a question for you on is essentially when you need to chat with internal folks about some kind of update, what are the kinds of things you would generally be pushing out?
Got it. So, tons of work's being done. We've talked about a lot of it here, right? But, you can't press a magic button and instantly it gets to everyone in your organization. They've read it and, they're aligned, right? It's kind of, say it once, say it again, maybe say it a third time, find different ways and modes to be able to push out that information. People learn, people understand things in so many different ways that just like, you know, a customer facing asset, right? You might create it in a short form, a long form, a visual, a text, and audio. We do the same things with our internal assets, right? We need to create assets that can be used in a variety of different ways. Now they're all saying the same thing, but they're being used and accepted in a variety of ways. So we run kind of essentially internal campaigns, right? How do we consistently update our teams on what's happening with the product and the latest materials? So it's any and everything in terms of communication to be able to get our message out in front and understood and accepted by the teams internally.
I think a really good example of this actually is the campaign we just ran for Insights, which is the product we work on. It was called Insights for All. And the premise here was that we offered a free trial for all customers for 60 days of the product. And getting that amplification out, that was all Cameron. I built the experience, and Cameron really messaged that out. So Cameron, maybe you can chat really quickly about the types of things that you pushed out for Insights for All.
Yeah. So again, collaborative effort, both between you and I, as well as the rest of marketing. But you know, we send out emails to sellers. Hey, here's an enablement pack. Here's essentially the email we suggest you send to your customers and why it's important to you. Here's maybe a slide deck if you're going to be talking to them and want to go a little bit more in depth. Here's a demo video of the product, so you're fully aware, as well as your customers, of what this free trial is going to give to you. So we send that out by email, right? We also then go on Slack and we hit the different channels that those sellers are going to be in on a day-to-day basis to make sure they see it there. We find opportunities to meet with different organizations, right? Maybe, you know, the West Coast sales team is having a session. Can we get in that session and jump in there and do a 5-minute pitch about this opportunity that they could pitch to their customers? But it's all about hitting them from multiple angles and also making sure that it's something of value, right? You don't want them to tune you out. You certainly don't want to be tuned out 3 times. So we try really hard to make it valuable when we decide to say something.
Perfect. Honestly, I think that all of the work that you did around that campaign drove so much adoption. I think it was one of the best examples of the ways that product marketing and product can partner together to take an event from, sure, this is happening, to, wow, like, of course this is happening and I'm so excited for it. So I think it's one of the really, truly best examples of the work we've done. So yay us.